Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome again to ThorsdayTech. Thursday instead of Thursday because the U is whatless. Thursday is better than Thursday. Go argue with your granny. Like, it's just better. And then tech because we're going to be talking about tech. We're going to be going through all the different things happening with tech news and etc. etc. So, getting right into it, we're going to be discussing two.
States government. Can you guess?
We're going to be discussing two videos today. One is going to be Sam Altman gets into bed with the Pentagon, which no surprise, by Michael Walker and the Navarro Media team. And then another Navarro Media team piece of content that I want to kind of go over is that ChatGPT is destroying our brains. Once again, not surprised. So we're going to go down this list. We're going to start talking through this stuff. Get your popcorn, get your seat, get yourself comfortable. And then we'll let the show begin. And I'm just going to, sit on the side and do my thing.
Well, we've been told for years now how billion-dollar companies like OpenAI will transform cancer treatment. So maybe it's the Department for Health. We've also been told how artificial intelligence will provide every child from every background their own private tutor. So perhaps it's the Department of Education. Which could it be? Of course. The first ever partnership OpenAI has made with government is with the US Department of Defense. Who could have guessed it? The contract will net OpenAI $200 million. The Pentagon describes the award as such. Under this award, the performer will develop prototype frontier AI capabilities to address critical national security challenges in both warfighting and enterprise domains. Warfighting. Now, there are a number of reasons why integrating military and AI technologies is a bad idea. How merging major AI companies with the military-industrial complex could go very wrong. I'll explain a number before, though. Let's go to one of the godfathers of AI, Geoffrey Hinton, describing one problem with autonomous lethal weapons.
The worst thing about them is big, powerful countries always have the ability to invade smaller, poorer countries. They're just more powerful. Mm-hmm. But if you do that using actual soldiers, you get bodies coming back in bags, and the relatives of the soldiers who were killed don't like it. So you get something like Vietnam. Mm-hmm. In the end, there's a lot of protest at home. If instead of bodies coming back in bags, it was dead robots, there'd be much less protest, and the military-industrial complex would like it much more because robots are expensive. And suppose you had something that could get killed and was expensive to replace. That would be just great. Big
Pause right here. We did a review of this, on the channel. You can go back and see kind of like the video where we go through this interview with Diary of a CEO, but it's something I'm spotting for the first time, or talking about for the first time, is his entire thinking process here. I get where he's coming from in terms of people prefer for robots to be casualties of war than people. But the reality is, in what scenario of war are you going to use robotics and they won't affect people? Let's say you're going to take over a country and use a robot army to do it. Are you telling me that those robots are just going to form a wall around the country? You're gonna end up killing people. That's the disingenuous part of this conversation, is that yes, it helps. First of all, he's saying it's a bad idea. So I'm not saying that I'm disagree or we're not in alignment, but it's more so that, okay, going into this, you're gonna build machinery, war machines, that are used by states, countries, right? Obviously, the more powerful, the more money, the more capable, the larger the force. And then the smaller country won't be able to compete. So now you get to press up on, as a bigger country, you get to press up on smaller countries and bully them. But the reality is, there's no stage of that where that bullying happening, that unilateral one-directional bullying, there's no scenario where that doesn't spill over into people. Like, there's no scenario. There's no scenario where AI is going to take over a country or the military is going to take over a country and nobody dies. Like, it's not happening. And then from there, I think the bigger concern is the fact that if you have the capability to send out that war force, you have your population okay with it. You also have an easy pathway to convince them that you didn't kill anyone, to convince them that no one was harmed, or that whoever was harmed deserved it. We're already seeing this now. So another layer of it. Like, there's multiple reasons why these are fucking dumb ideas. And by the way, this is 18 plus, so there will be swearing. Also, back to the show.
Can invade small countries much more easily because they don't have their soldiers being killed.
That was Geoffrey Hinton, a godfather of AI, won the Nobel Prize for developing this technology. I mean, he was speaking earlier this week, or at least that video from the Diary of a CEO podcast was released earlier this week. So before this link up with OpenAI, but I think that explains very well one reason why this would be a very bad idea. Because if you have AI bots fighting your wars, then there's no real cost. I mean, there's a financial cost, but that goes straight into the military industrial complex, which they're very happy to do. But there is very little political cost because humans aren't coming home in body bags, robots are. Now, if you're thinking this happens already, because we already have drones, and unmanned drones make war fighting much less dangerous, that's partly true. They do make war fighting much less dangerous. I think the point is just that AI would put this on steroids. So, for example, with drones, one limitation of them is that there can be sort of jamming technologies to stop the connection between the driver of the drone and the drone itself. If you have an autonomous drone, then you don't need to be in contact with it because it chooses the person or the thing to target and then does it on its own. So you can see why that would be brilliant for the US to be able to cause considerable damage to a country without any of their servicemen being remotely involved at all. Now, of course, as we've discussed on this show, there are also some more speculative concerns when it comes to AI, and particularly when it comes to the integration of AI with military equipment. As we've talked about before, two of the three so-called godfathers of AI think there is a significant chance AI could become autonomous and turn against humanity. Now, one of them is Geoffrey Hinton. It sounds like sci-fi, but these are the people who understand the technology more than anyone else. And this is what they say they're really worried about. So one of them is Geoffrey Hinton. You saw him earlier. We've talked about his concerns about existential risk on the show before. One of the others is Yoshua Bengio. So Bengio, along with Hinton and Yann LeCun, won the 2018 Turing Prize for his role in the development of neural networks. So they're the three so-called godfathers of AI. Bengio is warning against the risks of AI takeover. So 3 weeks ago, he gave a TED talk on AI deceiving us and suggesting we slow down AI development. I recommend you go and watch that, just 15 minutes long. Very interesting. And the reason I'm showing you that, though, now is because Bengio's call for AI to be put or to slow it down was put to another tech leader who was at that TED conference. This is Eric Schmidt, former CEO of Google. He doesn't think we should slow down AI development. He thinks we should just give it guardrails. Take a look.
There's a set of criteria that the industry believes are points where you want to metaphorically unplug it. One is where you get recursive self-improvement, which you can't control. Recursive self-improvement is where the computer is off learning and you don't know what it's learning. That can obviously lead to bad outcomes. Another one would be direct access to weapons. Another one would be that the computer systems decide to exfiltrate themselves, to reproduce themselves without our permission. So there's a set of such things. The problem with Yashua's speech with respect to such a brilliant person is stopping things in a globally competitive market doesn't really work. Instead of stopping agentic work, we need to find a way to establish the guardrails.
Now, I also recommend watching that full video of Eric Schmidt for a different reason.
Actually, to be 100% honest, it's not completely a lie. It is a half-truth. In that the truth is that maybe for him, the company, everything associated with the product, yeah, it doesn't really work. But for everything else, it does. So, half-truth. And this is another thing about definitions. Go back, watch other videos. This is another thing that I'm very much a believer, and I feel that definitions, self-installed definitions are very important, because it's very easy for you to mince a word and a concept together that don't naturally have their own, like the full entire environment doesn't represent the point you're making, but the statement's still true. So like the statement is still true from his side, but at the same time, the overarching idea, the overarching concept, the overarching truth is it's not just that. It's like, go back, I'm gonna say this word a lot, tesseracting. Anyways, back to the show.
Into the one with Yoshua Bengio, because Yoshua Bengio I found very persuasive. Eric Schmidt I thought was completely terrifying, because he's basically saying we don't need to slow it down, we just need these guardrails. Everyone in the AI world agrees that these are the red lines. No one in the AI world has actually concretely said they wouldn't do recursive self-improvement. So OpenAI, Anthropic, DeepMind, none of them have said they wouldn't do that, right? And lots of them are saying that they think they're probably on the cusp of that. Computers trying to, or these models trying to exfiltrate themselves. Anthropic have just shown that one of their new models did try and do that, and they haven't stopped. They haven't pulled out the plug. And then when it comes to weapons, he's saying people realize that connecting them to weapons would also be a red line. If we were to begin doing that, then we should pull the plug. Well, as you can see, that's now happening, right? The idea that AI companies saw military uses as too dangerous to deploy in the military might once have made sense. And maybe Eric Schmidt is just out of date, because OpenAI did originally ban the use of its software for military purposes. And that's largely because lots of people in this world did recognize the huge existential risks of making a technology which could sort of...
I don't think that's why they banned it. I think they're smarter than that, and we're not really giving them credit. I think they saw the end of that road. And the end of that road is they'd be bullied. Like, no matter what, if they build and they don't, like, put a complete pause publicly in between the military and them, the military will eventually just hire the scientists and bully them out of the technology. And then they have zero control over its destiny. So it's more of I feel like it's more of the smartest decision, lesser of two evils to them, within a pool of evil.
Sort of speed out of our control and then giving it access to all of the drones. In January, though, OpenAI quietly dropped that ban, and presumably seeing there were billions of dollars to be made. Also, I think they're in a bit of an alliance with the American security establishment, because OpenAI say the reason you can't slow us down is because we need to beat China. And so there's just this really cozy relationship between OpenAI and the military-industrial complex in the United States, which I think is terrifying. Schmidt was also out of date when he gave that speech, because AI is already being given some autonomy when it comes to killing people. And this is a report from Deutsche Welle last month on autonomous drones in the Ukraine war.
AI is speeding up processes like the kill chain. Locate, attack, evaluate. The Ukrainian army excels in using drone data for tactical decisions. Many of these processes are now automated. In fact, autonomous navigation is proving far.
One thing I think people should take in is, while we are seeing advancement in medical, while we are seeing advancement in genetics, while we are seeing advancement in food production, bioengineering, look at how much advancement we're seeing in military usage. Look how much, and I learned this lesson from a wise man back when I was doing deliveries. There's a Ukrainian dude I used to work with, and he used to tell me, because he was an engineer, and he worked with I think the government to create systems, right? Or cybersecurity or something like that. But he was telling me, whatever you think is in the public the government and or the military has had it at least 5 to 10 years prior. And this is a pattern I started to pay attention to, and I saw it everywhere. So like you could see it in the internet, you could see it in not necessarily social media networks, but communications. You could see it in even like broadcasting and presentation. A lot of the stuff and a lot of the technology we use now are first funded by or engineered for military industrial complex. Like globally, not just like any one country, just the concept itself. So I see this and it makes sense, but it still gives me pause to be like, why? Why is that our direction for this technology? If you watch the previous videos, if you watch other previous videos, I try to make a point that the creation of a super intelligence almost guarantees, but generally points the direction of the expiry of military war machines, military equipment. But watch the video. This is a previous video. Anyways, back to the show.
Far more effective. When drones are flown by humans, hit rates are typically between 10 and 20%. But with drones powered by autonomous navigation, hit rates can jump to as high as 80%. Loitering munitions might take the form of kamikaze drones. They circle over an area for up to 9 hours. Sensors identify potential targets, comparing them to the targets they were trained on. In the event of a good match, the drone and its explosive charge descends, crashing straight into the target.
An example is just to walk through what the tech is. These type of drones he's describing, the reason why they consider them that branch of drone, because this technology is not new. This technology has been, honestly, I would argue, pioneered under the Obama administration. But point is, this technology, how it works essentially is, for it to autonomously work when disconnected from like a base station, the home hub, the way it works is it has the same code you would use in the base station on the device. So now the device itself can do the thing that you would have to do from the base station, so that no matter if it's cut off, it can still continue its action, right? So once you add that, we're using like kind of unsophisticated but still sophisticated levels of AI. We're not at the level of super intelligence. At the level of super intelligence, that creates doors, like the ability for that drone to then plan a route in advance, to know where people will be in advance, to know how to add extra sensors that can deduce where a person is or where they've been in advance. Like it can get a lot further and a lot scarier. And as this is a Moore's Law thing, as the technology kind of reduces in size over time, what happens is these things get smaller or they get more precise and more capable.
Crashing straight into the target. Typically, soldiers will monitor the process, keeping a human in the loop. If in doubt, they can still abort.
So if in doubt, they can still abort. We'll see how long that lasts. As well, especially because, remember, as I said, one of the reasons why an AI drone is particularly valuable is because if you lose connection with it because of a system jammer, it can still get the job done. So there's a real incentive for the military to say to this AI, whether or not you lose contact with us, we want you to destroy this target. Right? So that is completely autonomous killing. Stephen Methven, welcome to the show. Sorry, it's been a while. These stories have taken quite a while. It's a very interesting show. But Stephen, are you as worried as me about the merger of these AI companies with the world's most advanced military?
Yeah, I'd say I'm super worried about it. I was thinking while you were doing that piece about being a kid and watching the film RoboCop for the first time. I was probably far too young to be watching it, but it opens with, I think in Detroit, they've got a kind of autonomous robot police officer who goes haywire and kills some civilians. And you know who's delighted by that is the competitor AI robot company. Because the realization is that once these technologies are in the system of war or policing, they don't ever come out. They just need to get better or be improved. There's room for competition. And improvement in this case means improved killing machines. One of the things that I think of as the most disturbing aspect of modern warfare, and it's an aspect that this will only add to, is the remoteness of killing in modern war. So I think you put it in terms of it being less dangerous to go to war, but you sort of think that going to war should be kind of dangerous. There should be a sort of repellent force that means that it's a really big decision to make, not just because you're going to potentially lose some of your soldiers, but because you're asking human beings to kill other human beings. And the gamification of contemporary war, the remoteness, the fact that you can kill people from a faraway control center without having to actually witness or feel what it's like to kill them, taking on no moral hazard yourself as a soldier, I think is a very dangerous direction and disturbing direction that war has gone in. And of course, AI, autonomous AI, would only make that worse, because it wouldn't even be clear, who would be responsible were it to go wrong, were civilians to be killed, were the wrong targets to be hit. So yeah, I find that pretty disturbing. I mean, it's also the case that it's not very clear that the use of AI. I mean, I think one of the arguments will be made is that AI warfare or AI-led warfare or AI-led weapons will be more precise, will have less room for error. But we know from AI that's already being used in war, like in Gaza, for example, that there are thresholds that are still set by human beings. So you have more accurate killing, but you can set the thresholds such that you actually don't mind if a number of wrong people get killed. So, for example, Lavendar in Gaza, which is used by Israel to identify targets, has apparently a 10% error rate.
Thank you for bringing this up. This needs to be talked about. The concept of Lavendar AI. The concept of Lavendar AI is one of the most evil things I've ever heard of in my life. Like, the concept of a Lavendar AI is essentially offloading the concept of harming or killing a person to a system that has no relationship to life. Like, no understanding of what it is to live. All because you can't do it yourself. Or because the military at the time has decided for itself that it doesn't want to have people in between the option of killing, because they want it just done. They don't care. The people in between are the safety net. They've always been the safety net. Because people feel things. People have emotions. People get hurt. People think of the concept of the thing that they're fucking doing, and it makes them want to stop before they do it. People have these things. You're supposed to have those things in the system so that you don't go wrong, so that there is no tyranny. Like, you can't approach these things from a perspective of, it has to be my choice. True power and leadership has nothing to do with that. True power and leadership isn't about you choosing. It's about you facilitating choice. That's what it's about. Letting people choose. And then once you let people choose, if you don't like the direction the people are going, give them things so they can choose something else. That's it. That's where your line is. The concept of shedding the direct connection to it so that you can guarantee it is evil. Everyone knows it's evil. Everyone knows it's evil. If you put yourself in the perspective of someone doing that to you, you know it's evil. You know it's evil. Everyone knows it. Like, so many people know it's evil. And then that system plus the system of tracking. Look it up yourself. The system of tracking used to find the people. And then the permissions, the extra permissions granted, like he describes, to fucking make it easier to have larger pools of targets.
Error rate, that's according to
It's
Israeli,
evil.
magazine 972. And also the soldiers or the Israeli military was allowed to set the threshold to a relatively high degree when it came to the killing of civilians. I mean, obviously that we know serves Israel's grander purpose in Gaza. But that's a human decision, which is, when you set the threshold higher, you're therefore guaranteeing, when it's AI, which is maybe more accurate, the deaths of more civilians. And then there was another very disturbing sort of piece of AI used in Gaza called Where's Daddy? And again, what it did was it identified targets, and then it tracked them to their familial homes before those homes were bombed. So in other words, guaranteeing, in most cases, not just the killing of a target, but the killing of whole families. So yeah, those are very scary applications of AI in ways that have allowed, a genocide to occur. And one of the reasons that a genocide has been allowed to occur is because there aren't soldiers who are, in the same way actively involved in it. There would be much more, I think, resistance from soldiers, from reservists to it, if it was the case that there was actually confrontation between individuals and the actual human pulling of a trigger in many cases. So the removal of this kind of moral hazard that soldiers ought to really take on when they engage in warfare, just for me means that warfare will become more brutal. Not a good turn of events, I don't think.
Not a good turn of events. I suppose, hearing how the IDF sort of speak about Palestinians, I think they probably would manage to do it without it being automated. I totally agree with you, though, that it does make it much easier. I would much prefer a person to have to make that decision and to face the real consequence. People say it with meat eating, don't they? That sort of, if you had to kill the cow or the sheep yourself, you might just go for the vegetarian option. And I think you can have a similar argument about war fighting, which is if you don't have to do the killing yourself, you don't face the same moral quandary which could stop you doing it in the first place. As for the sort of outcomes that people think are more sci-fi, because they are more sci-fi, I still just think, there's three godfathers of AI. Jan LeCun says he doesn't think we should worry about them taking control. Two of them, Yoshua Bengio and Jeffrey Hinton, do. So that's 2 out of 3. That doesn't make me really confident that they are going to take control, right? What it does, though, is make me very reluctant to dismiss those concerns, right? If you've got 2 of the 3 godfathers of the technology saying this could end the world, I find the impulse to dismiss that concern strange, which is why I keep banging on about it.
Yes, thank you. It's fucking strange. So, that was video 1. It's fucking strange that these thought processes aren't floating around. There isn't a wall of fucking things preventing it. It's crazy. But it should illustrate why humanity needs to pay attention to mental health. It should illustrate it. Next video. ChatGPT is destroying our business. I believe these videos I'm watching for the first time.
Of SAT essays. One group was allowed to use ChatGPT, one could use Google's search engine, and one was, quote, brain only, meaning they could use no tools at all. Now, the researchers didn't just examine the quality of the essays, they also used an EEG, which measures and records electrical activities in the brain to monitor the neural and behavioral consequences of each approach. And it found that the ChatGPT users, quote, consistently underperformed at neural, linguistic, and behavioral levels. They found that compared to the brain-only group, ChatGPT users had reduced neural connectivity, impaired memory and quote recall, and a reduced sense of ownership, with many resorting by the end of the study to simply copying and pasting their essays from the AI. What's more, because of that sense of ownership, those who wrote the Google search-assisted or brain-only essays experienced higher levels of satisfaction with their work. But what is most concerning is that the study showed that the repeated use of the AI tool could have longer-lasting impacts. When the ChatGPT group were asked to produce brain-only written work, they did not return to the cognitive levels of the group that had been writing without the tool from the beginning. And the researchers call this an accumulation of cognitive debt, whereby, quote, repeated reliance on external systems like LLM.
Repeated reliance on these. The part that is most important about that whole phrase. Diminished performance. Pay attention to diminished performance. The reason why I say pay attention to diminished performance isn't because it gives you a certain decrease. I think that's the first conceptual layer of it. The next is over time. Always add over time. A lot of times that we don't step into that dimension of adding things. Over time has a separate effect than the effect you're measuring. So like whatever cognitive decline we're seeing now isn't the end of our cognitive decline and isn't the limit of the cognitive decline. It's the number snapshot of the current momentum downward. So diminished performance. When you replace your own thoughts with something else's thoughts, you stop wanting to create them yourself.
Replaces effortful cognitive processes required for independent thinking, resulting in diminished performance when those external systems are removed. This finding led the researchers to voice concern that large language models could, quote, fundamentally restructure cognitive architecture. Now, we have to mention that this study was small. It was made up of just 54 subjects from the Boston area. However, this is the latest in a number of studies the MIT lab have conducted to find out the social impact of widespread AI use. A study from earlier this year analyzed millions of interactions and found that daily usage of ChatGPT correlated with higher loneliness, dependence, problematic use, and lower socialization. It also found that the heaviest users were more likely to use the LLM for emotional support, although the study did note that it found correlation, not causation. So it could be that, in fact, people who are already lonely might be more likely to use AI to seek emotional bonds. Now, some of you guys might know this, some of you might not, but when I'm not chewing your ear off on Navarra Live, I am an academic. I work and I teach at a university, and it's obviously no secret that students have been using ChatGPT to write essays. I certainly feel like when I'm marking and I feel like I've read like 6 or 7 ChatGPT generated essays in a row, I feel like my brain is just like sludge. It's like atrophied by the end of it. But the two things that I found quite interesting with this study was not the headlines, but the fact that, first of all, the ones that were generated by brain-only or Google search-assisted essays were generally a lot more diverse in their quality, but also in their approach, in the creative thinking that went behind the essays. Whereas the ChatGPT ones were largely, standardized in quality and standardized in content. And I think that kind of flattening of knowledge and that flattening of like, suddenly now when you write an essay prompt, everyone's sort of giving the same version of the same essay. And like, it kind of makes sense and it's kind of passable, but like the dynamism of like human thought and creativity is completely lost because ChatGPT will always do lowest common denominator thinking. But another thing that I found really interesting.
Also, and before she escapes the point, because it's a major point, It's a major point. So back here, she's describing.
But like the dynamism of like human thought and creativity is completely lost because
this part, this is the part. So like that concept,
ChatGPT will always.
What I want to kind of introduce is like what we're seeing now is the beginning of cascading events. And on top of that, like the way I conceptualize thought may not be the same for everyone, but the way I conceptualize thought is very much so like thoughts are interrelated. So like I don't need to like think of a video game where a video game needs to like create every item in a scene, in a place. Needs to texture it, needs to add like a look to it, shape to it. So the difference is concepts is more like the entire scene in a small package. Like if I think of my mom, I think of like all of my mom, how much I love my mom. I think of all of the things that like are related to my life with my mom. But the concept is in terms of communicating it is small. The problem with, I'm saying this is related because the cascading event of diminishing cognitive ability also means that if you lose keystone concepts as well, you lose large chunks of information. If you lose certain specific concepts, you lose large chunks of information. Like a perfect example of that is humanity building cities. Like we built cities for all of the right reasons, but the cities themselves separate us from all of the ecosystems around it in the world. What happens is the concept of us from going from like city to wild is the concept of us losing all of the information related to wild. It's a keystone concept. If you have those concepts erode away, you lose large swaths of information, even the ability to think about perceiving it, think about observing it, thinking about it. You have to like this is a point.
But another thing that I found really interesting as well was that question of ownership. They found that people who had done the Google search assisted or brain only papers felt really positive and accomplished and content and proud of their papers. Whereas the people who used ChatGPT felt indifferent and felt they couldn't even recall really what they had written using the ChatGPT assisted model. And I think that question of like, just because we can, does that mean we should? Like, is this actually making us more fulfilled as a human species to be outsourcing our critical thinking skills to this large language model? But also, I think, alongside this kind of moral panic around students using ChatGPT, and often it involves a lot of finger wagging at students of like, classic, like young people are lazy, young people don't want to do hard things. I actually think that it's a much bigger problem than that. I think it's not that students themselves have just become lazier inherently. I think what's happened is two things. First of all, the entire culture of academia has become far more consumerist. It's become far more about just getting a qualification, ticking a box, getting the minimum viable product, and going on and finding a job. The fact that, we have larger teaching classes, we don't have as much educator time that is dedicated to teaching. Staff numbers are much lower relative to the student population. There is an overall culture that degrees or education is something to be consumed to tick a box rather than something to enrich our critical thinking skills or something that we might, even find enjoyable or meaningful in some deeper sense. Another thing that's happening is students have no time. And this is an economic question. More and more of my students are working unbelievable hours in paid jobs. Some of them are working full time and trying to squeeze their degree around a full-time job because they can't afford to live in London on their student loan. They don't come from money. They don't have, a home in London or a flat in London that when they graduate, they can go into. They need to work to pay the bills. And if you're working a 35-hour week on top of your degree, it's not surprising that when you come to your classes, you're going to be tired and you're going to look for these shortcuts to just get you over the line. So it's a problem, but I think we're wagging our finger at the wrong people. I don't think it's that students have inherently become lazier or not as good as like the old generation. I think the education system has changed, and I think the economy is shrinking the amount of available time that students have to explore intellectually and to really get the most out of a degree. Kieran.
Speaking of school, this is a bad phrase. Speaking of school, one thing I think, and I feel like this is a thought branch. I think I'm gonna write a thing and then we can discuss it. But here's the thing. I think the one thing schools are missing is introducing the concept of psychology, at the level and timing that you introduce the concept of language. As much as and let them grow together at the same rate. Because if we could communicate psychology and then create a culture of communicating psychology, we can also help ourselves as a society. Fix problems before they get too bad. It eliminates a lot of the fuckery. I think, at least. It eliminates a lot of the fuckery in life. But I don't know. Random idea. Open source, take it, do what you want with it.
Is ChatGPT causing brain rot?
Well, it's very good of you to come to me on this, but I was actually really fascinated by what you were saying, Dalia, and I don't believe in wasting people's times talking about things that I'm not an expert on. But I do think, just a couple of brief reflections. So I used to teach before the dawn of ChatGPT and that kind of thing, really. I mean, it was kind of just at just before the last phase of innocence, you might say, before they were being used en masse, based on what you're saying, used en masse by students. And it kind of always shocks me for that reason when I hear that, because I'm so used to, it being one or two bad apples. But I want to interrogate that briefly based on what you said, Daniel. Yeah. I think what you said was very interesting because you're talking about reasserting a kind of political economy in our understanding of ChatGPT and things like that. And what we tend to do with ChatGPT, Claude, all of these kind of large language models and AI generally is sever it, detach it from socio-political or socio-economic underpinnings and just see it as this kind of totally alien thing that floats without any kind of origin or mooring. And so you're absolutely right in very specific material terms to explain, in this particular case, why your students might use it more often. And then it's not just because they're lazy, it's for the reasons that you've given, which are very, very
relatable. Also because they're lazy.
It's also because they're lazy.
It's also because they're lazy. This is also the part of science that I feel as much as you dive into the research, you have to connect it to your life as a person. There's a lot of people that like being fucking lazy. There's so many fucking people that like to be lazy. And to be honest, to be 100% transparent, at times I'm one of them. At times I'm also incredibly fucking lazy. Because lazy's easy. And sometimes there's too much hard. But anyways, point is, back to the show.
All of us are familiar with. So I applaud your political economy, if I can call it that, of ChatGPT and large language models and AI. Beyond that, don't really have very much interesting to say.
So that was ChatGPT is destroying our brains. I want to make sure I properly get names. Oh, Dahlia Gabrielle, I think. But anyways, point is, these are interesting concepts. Like, we have to think of these things from the perspective of not just the now, not just the moment, not just the where we're at. It's the where we're going from where we've been. Like, put the three together in your mind. So you see a line, a pattern. So you see a kind of direction. And then, I still think, if for my overall opinion, I still think that the solution to this, from an individual consumer standpoint, the thing we could all do to potentially even fix it, is build a culture. Like, build the habits into a culture, or add the habits to our cultures, so that we don't use certain things in certain ways. For instance, AI, if we opt to use it as a tool only, you still drive production, but at the same time, you stave off losing control of your life and humanity. So I think, personally, we gotta build a culture. Like, we gotta analyze the technology, start thinking about it, think about where it could go, and then decide what we can do today to not put ourselves in that position. And then once we kind of think of where, what, when, the actions shouldn't. Like, when you want to do a test yourself, that type of stuff. Making choices so that you don't advance in a certain direction. And those things come from culture. Like, all of those things come from culture. All of those things come from what we tell ourselves. And then the best part about culture is, if you do it right, a lot of cultures, you can pass it down to the next generation, bro. So it keeps the momentum going, bro. So this is what I kind of think. But I hope you like the show. I don't know how long of an episode this is, but it might be a long one. And I hope you have a good night. Peace.
Of their papers. Whereas the people who use ChatGPT felt indifferent.
That'd have been such a bar. That'd have been such a bar. That'd have been such a bar.
Of their papers. Where.
Ooh, what a bar.